Hello, my name is R.O. Smith, and this is Pastor Karla, and this is episode 2 of Conversation with Friends. Conversation with Friends is an authentic discussion in which we see how faith interacts or engages with the culture around us. And so let's get right into it. So this week I want to talk about the tribalization of our culture. It feels like, and what I mean by that, it feels like we're kind of operating in all these different tribes or boxes in culture. Do you feel that, like that tension where you have to kind of pick a side, pick a place, pick a pole?
Absolutely. I mean, we certainly see that in politics for sure.
Right.
I mean, but we also see it in other areas as well,
Right.
in every area of life, like what you identify with. We like to label. Why do you think we like to label so much?
I don't know. I think it's like, I mean, if you look at like Scripture and the story of Scripture, obviously, the tribes are nothing new, right? I mean, there's always this interaction with tribes. And I think in the Old Testament, when God called Abraham into this, to start this new tribe, it was unique because in that time, tribes were about self-preservation and like winning at all costs or just survival. Where now this new tribe that God has called and through Abraham is now about blessing others, to be a blessing to others, and not your self-preservation will be in how you bless others, which I think is unique. It's about the others, but it feels like all throughout history we've just kind of tried to set ourselves into groups, and it just feels, I feel that tension now today, and but then you said something about Christ came
Yeah,
to.
well, totally. It's kind of interesting when you think about the church that way too, because Christ came really to give or to bring our world an overarching meta narrative, right? A story for the whole world.
Right.
And people took Christ and put Christ in a religion, and so made Christ tribal, which is kind of interesting to think about because, when you talk about the Old Testament and what you were saying, like tribes were naturally hung together because of kinship or space or place. And when Abraham was called, he wasn't called out of kinship. He wasn't called out of place or space. He was called by God. And so his calling was for the world, as Christ's message was for the world, and we have made it tribal.
So a story in the New Testament that I think is interesting is obviously the woman that was caught in adultery and brought before Jesus, right? And then the people, the Pharisees are there like, what should we do? Moses says we should stone her, and what do you say? And it feels like just that encapsulates the tension that we all feel today. It's like pick a side, right? What do you say? And so if he knows if he says stoner, then it's like, oh, well, that's different than what you've been talking about. And if he says, that she's fine, then that's not good either. And so, but then it says Jesus starts writing in the sand, right? I liken that today. You know how they always tell you, think, before you press send on a text, before you tweet something, think about it. I feel like that's Jesus thinking about it. He's like, I'm not going to press send yet because I got to think about this.
It's amazing how much time was spent in seminary trying to discover or think about what Jesus wrote. You know what I'm saying? How many classes did you have where?
Right.
What did Jesus write?
I just think he wrote a smiley face anyway. But then what's interesting is that he gets up and he says, any of you who have not sinned, let them be the first to cast stones, and they drop their stones, right? And it feels like Jesus didn't side with the people that were ready to stone, but then he looked at the woman and he says, woman, go and sin no more. He didn't let her off of her. He didn't say, oh, what you were doing was fine. He said what you were doing was wrong, but now go and sin no more. So he chose this middle way, what we call it the third way. And you said something interesting that comes out of kind of the Eastern Orthodox.
Yeah.
This
idea, I think, not necessarily Eastern Orthodox, but the Eastern tradition.
The Eastern tradition, sorry.
Of really being a place where you approach the world more with question than with answer. And Jesus approached the world that way. So even in that story, which is a beautiful story of Jesus in the third way, he asked question. He didn't give answer. He didn't place judgment on one side or the other.
Right.
We imply that through his question, what he thought, but he really approached the world with question. I think we struggle with the third way. In our culture, even as Christians, we like to we call the third way moderacy, you know? We want to be moderates.
Yeah.
My whole life goal is to be a moderate. I feel like I spend so much time trying to be a moderate, which is just another tribe, really.
Right.
It's not the third way.
Right.
And Jesus was not being a moderate in that situation. He wasn't trying to weigh the good of one side over the other and take the best of both and
Right,
meet in the
right.
middle. He wasn't doing any of that. He was elevating the conversation to a different plane, to a different place. And that's what the third way is, I think. Taking the conversation to a different place.
So he's saying get off of the linear like line of markation, and so let's go above that.
Yes, which I think is far more difficult to do. I mean, being a moderate is also difficult, but
Right.
I think taking the conversation to a different playing field is incredible.
I had a youth once say, "Aro, I don't know. I can't figure out where you stand," and that's when I was like, "Okay, then I must be doing something right."
Yeah.
Because I don't, but I asked that youth. I said, "Do you don't know where I stand, but do you feel loved and cared for? I mean, do you not like that?" And they're like, "No, I know you love and care for me. I just don't know where you stand on certain things, and that sometimes is hard."
Yeah, because we have this, don't you think, in our culture, this intense desire to paint the world in black and white. Like we need that box, and I think the reason we do is because we have really lost our perspective on God and the mystery of who God is. We want to categorize even our God, and so we are uncomfortable not having boxes over things. And I don't know if we talked about this last week, but I love how Franciscan priest Richard Rohr talks about the mystery of God as being, we think of mystery as being unknowable versus endless knowability. And I think that's part of our desire to label is because we are uncomfortable with endless knowability. We don't feel, we can't control that. You know, and the third way is certainly uncontrollable.
So today, in today's culture, how do we navigate all the tribalism or all the boxes that we're put in? Is it or what is that third way? Is it looking into ourselves more? Is it how do we approach that?
What do you think?
I don't know. Let's take a pause there and think
I
about
think that was exactly my answer. I think we ask more questions instead of having answers, you know?
Yeah.
I use the third way in our conversation.
Oh, I got you.
What do you think? I feel like there's...
see what you did there.
Yeah, you see what I did there? I feel like that's the problem. We want to come to conclusions about things versus hanging with the question. And I think the third way is a question more than it is a conclusion.
I remember I had a class at Fuller, Craig Detweiler, and I remember he said, we just, as Christians, I think we need to do a better job of asking good questions.
Yeah.
Instead of kind of hitting people over the head with our theology and our doctrine and like what we think is right, we need to be better at asking questions. And that's always hung with me. And I mean, we talked about that last week with, going to Fuller, right? When Dr. Mao said, I want you to walk away with more questions than you came with. And I just think there was something to that, where a lot of people would feel like that's slippery or that's trying not to stand anywhere, but it feels like, actually, no, that's the best place to stand.
Yeah.
You know?
Because the question isn't necessarily to be answered, it's to be able to sit with the question itself, which is very Eastern and very third way. It's to be able to sit in the question and recognize the process of the question is the answer. And that is very hard for us in the Western world because we want answers. Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah, so I guess the question for us is what boxes are we living in or what tribes are we trying to identify with, and how do we break out of that tribe? So let's think about that. Maybe I'm sure we'll circle back around to it, but that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us at Conversation with Friends, and hope to see you next week. Remember, make sure you like our YouTube and subscribe to our YouTube page, like our Facebook page, and we'll see you next week.